Coming up next, DC News number 129. It's going to be an all Vertigo edition of DC News. We're going to talk about the new replacement for the head of Vertigo Comics. Now that Karen Berger's gone, we're going to tell you who that is. We're also going to talk about Vertigo line, how it's going to be bringing back an old title from the DC Universe, revamping it and bringing it back essentially the same way it was in the first place. And we're going to finish up with Grant Morrison and his future role in the Vertigo Universe. All that and more coming right up. Hey, you want to save 20% off of everything in the store? Then show up on the 20th of every month, because the 20th is Founders Day here at Alternate Reality. And on Founders Day, everything except this week's new comics and bulk supplies is 20% off. That's right, every single thing in the store is 20% off every 20th here at Alternate Reality.
Bo insists that he's not a naked lunatic, and that it's just a Three's Company level misunderstanding. We're going to run through the DC news while he's still a free man.
Hey, does anybody remember what happened to the Biodome people? DC Comic Book News, Episode 129, Obfuscation Jubilation.
Hey folks, Comic Book Man here. Welcome once again to my video outhouse. It's time for, Bo, what time is it?
You know, it's Christmas time. Why are you
Christmas
striking
time!
people?
Christmas time! Coming from Alternate.
It's January.
What time is it?
Right now, it's DC News time.
DC News time! Coming to you from Alternate
Actually,
Reality.
it's even better DC News time.
Located at the intersection of 111th and Kenzie, beautiful downtown Mount Greenwood. Alternate Reality, where all my new comics, especially all of my Vertigo DC comics,
As long as they last.
are 15% off every day.
They're going to be going on forever.
Bo!
Yes.
In this all Vertigo edition of DC News,
Yes.
Karen Berger is no longer in charge of Vertigo. We talked about that before in
Right,
a
she
previous
resigned.
news.
She resigned or was pushed out the door.
She
We don't know.
resigned or was pushed out the door or something. But whatever the case, she is no longer in charge of Vertigo. But that means somebody has to take her place. Who?
Well, DC stayed in house. Shelley Bond was an assistant to Karen
Who?
Berger. Shelley Bond.
Okay.
Who's actually they talk about her a lot on stuff. She's been promoted to be the executive editor of Vertigo.
Okay.
Will Dennis, who was an assistant editor, is now the group editor. And both of them will report to Hank Canals, who is now the senior vice president of Vertigo. Hank Canals is, well, for one, he's basically the guy who's in charge of the Wildstorm offices at DC. He's also the guy that, even though he never gets credit for it,
We're screwed!
co-created Wildcats with Rob Liefeld.
Oh. Twice. We're screwed!
Well, he's been there for a while, but what's interesting about this is the fact that Karen Berger reported to Diane Nelson and Dan DiDio. Bond is reporting to Hank Canals in a position that didn't exist until Berger decided to leave, so you think Karen probably was pushed out the door. Although,
maybe.
to celebrate it, DC hasn't announced what it is yet.
That's a rumor.
It's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
But the fact that Karen Berger's gone is not going to be a bad thing. DC's going to do something. Vertigo is going to celebrate her entire tenure of being editor at Vertigo.
Oh, I'm sure she'll be thrilled to have that instead of a check. What?
I'm assuming she got a nice severance package, you know, stock options or something like that.
Let's see. Would I rather get a weekly check, or would I rather have a Vertigo month donated to Karen Berger? I'll take the check.
Maybe they'll put her face over the Vertigo logo.
Vertigo Universe continues over at DC Comics, and they have a new book planned, which is going to allow them to save the copyright on an old DC title, which is probably lapsed by now, which they did in the late 70s, early 80s. It was an anthology book, lasted about 6 or 7 issues, it was a $1 comic, and it was called
Time Warp!
Time Warp!
2013 new anthology series of specials, whatever, but it'll have stories from Lost David Lindelof, Jeff Lemire, Matt Kent, Mark Buckingham, Dan Abnett, Peter Milligan, Ray Fawkes, Simon Spurrier, Gail Simone, Raphael Albuquerque, and Tom Fowler. This will be a regular anthology book, which will probably ship every other month. So for people going, the Vertigo line is going away. They just added a brand new book. They're not going anywhere for a while.
Okay, this anthology book, I am betting it's going to be like Unexpected and a couple of the other anthology books that they've done. It'll probably be only one or a couple of issues. It will probably be $7.99 a pop, which is the reason why it will be only one or a couple of issues. And as an anthology book, which never sells, anthology books never sell. They're a wonderful idea. They're a great way to get a variety of interesting stories from a bunch of creative people, but they never sell. So I wouldn't expect it to be around very long. And the funny thing about this is Time Warp, the original Time Warp, which I remember late 70s, early 80s, stocking at the Comic Book Emporium way back when, a million years ago, when I first met this guy. That book was an anthology book exactly like that. It wasn't no Vertigo at the time, but it was exactly like that, and that didn't sell worth a damn either back then.
I would assume that DC's going to do something with this thing. they're gonna have this thing available digitally. So you know,
Oh,
whatever,
I'm sure.
So whatever it makes in print, which will be probably nothing,
Yeah.
they'll make up with the digital sales.
Well, we hope.
We hope.
We hope.
And it's probably not gonna be $7. It'll probably be like $3.99. It'll be a quarterly book, which means DC's putting no risk in it whatsoever. This book's only shipping 4 times a year. You know?
Oh, it is?
Well, they haven't announced the exact
Okay.
schedule of everything, but you assume every 3 months, every 4 months. It's not, or bi-monthly. I can't see a monthly.
Are those stories self-contained? Or
The stories will all be self-contained.
So
You know what I mean?
if
Yeah,
you
that's-
do that, then
Generally
usually,
speaking, that's what an anthology book
Yeah.
is. It's 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how big the book is. It's a grouping of self-contained stories by different creators and artists.
I mean, if you're going
Writers.
through that list, you've got you've got like 9 writers there, and you've got about 4 or 5 artists. So, it's, you know,
I'll
4
take a
times,
look at it,
4
sure.
times a year.
Okay. Our last story up involves a man who is no stranger to Vertigo and whose work is no stranger to Vertigo, and that is, of course, Grant Morrison, who's been toiling away in Superman Batman land for the last couple of years now, who's getting ready to leave there and bring back one of his favorite characters of Vertigo.
Well, as soon as he finishes up Multiversity, which is his last DC Universe story, he and Cameron Stewart, who's working on a Multiversity issue,
Yeah.
are bringing back one of your favorite concepts of all time, Sea Guy.
Sea Guy!
He's coming back.
Aw, Sea Guy doesn't sell at all.
And Morrison said he's not going to write a sequel to Joe the Barbarian. Now,
That actually sold better. He'd be better off doing a sequel.
well, he
to
said
Joe
he
the
had
Barbarian.
an idea, but he didn't really see the purpose of what's like people taking over Joe's school. But as far as
This is the purpose behind doing it right
Yeah,
here.
seriously. Well, Morrison's not poor. He's making a fair
Yeah.
amount of money on screenplays for movies that haven't come out yet. And if you're talking about, well, what's the future of Vertigo? Morrison, once he gets done with Multiversity, he's only going to be doing Vertigo stuff. So,
Well, I don't think Morrison's going to be the cornerstone of the Vertigo universe.
well, no, he's not going to be. He's not going to be the cornerstone as far as the Vertigo universe used to be. I mean, but he's the only guy who's left out of that original
Does
bunch.
Sea Guy have semen?
He probably does.
Okay,
Yeah. Yes, but
thanks.
No, Vertigo began way back when as an answer to Constantine and Swamp Thing being too adult for the regular DC universe, and so they launched this whole adult line, which was Vertigo adult line,
And then they brought in a whole bunch of British writers.
and
And
so
so the Vertigo line was basically where DC put all his British writers.
And well, that's what catapulted Vertigo. Otherwise, it would have been just a place to house stories that were a little too hard-edged for what the DC universe was way
Yeah,
back
so
then.
you
But when the
got
British writers
Preachers,
came in, boom, right
everything
through the
went
roof.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, you got Preacher, and Garth Ennis came in.
Preacher, Sandman, Transmetropolitan.
Transmetropolitan. I mean, this is when Vertigo was Vertigo, and it was
Yeah.
a big deal. Now it's just like, oh yeah, they're still around. It's not as big a deal as it used to be.
Well, and the problem with that is they pretty much mined out all the British creators.
And all the British creators
So
ended up
where do you
going,
go to from here?
Yeah, they all said, well, we've done this stuff. Now we're going to do some mainstream stuff. So we're going to go over and we're going to write these. Morrison says, well, I'm going to write Batman and Superman, and I'm going to go over to Marvel and write X-Men, and then Warren Ellis said, well, we don't really understand what you do, so why don't you go somewhere? Ellis went, well, bye.
Well, they all graduated to mainstream work.
Yeah, I mean,
But do they write it dark? They still stay dark.
Well, yeah, they write it.
Yeah,
they write it dark, but they're writing their mainstream characters.
I mean, there's nothing light and eerie about anything that Garth Ennis is doing in any company he's working at. I mean, Fury Max is not happy. It's not a happy story at all.
No. Okay. And that's it. We're done. Finished right here. Got no more DC news. Go to the store's website. Check out all the DC news this hand sends me there that I post up. Bo,
Yes.
do it.
Sarah, tell all these fine folks where to go to find the website.
This is just to keep me busy, isn't it?
Yes.
www.myalternatereality.com.
So stop off at the store's website. Check out all of his news. And until next time, this is Comic Book Man.
And this is Bo, who actually thought Karen Berger was just okay. It's high praise, David.
Well, that's high praise. That's high praise. You're okay. Bye.
I get my coffee.
The Video Outhouse is brought to you by some of the finest people willing to work for free. This is a list of some of them.